A chance worth taking. The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the city bus as Sienna Cole clutched her worn portfolio against her chest. Her fingers were still stained with paint from the morning shift at the art supply store, and her shoes had holes she tried to hide with strategic walking. At 24, she had dreamed of gallery openings and museum exhibitions, but life had dealt her something different. Her mother's medical bills consumed everything she earned, leaving her with nothing but hope and a relentless belief that her art mattered. The address on the business card seemed like a mistake. Penthouse Suite, Meridian Tower. Victor Kane had left it at the small coffee shop where she sometimes displayed her paintings, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "I want to see more of your work." The Tower of Dreams. The lobby of Meridian Tower gleamed with polished granite and crystal chandeliers that scattered light like diamonds across the marble floors. Sienna felt profoundly out of place in her thrift store jacket and faded jeans. The security guard eyed her with suspicion until she showed him the business card. His entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Kane is expecting you. Top floor." The elevator ride felt like ascending into another dimension. Each floor that passed represented a life she had never known, a world of comfort and security that seemed as distant as the stars. When the doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment, Sienna stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around three sides of the room, offering a view of the city that made her feel like she was floating above the world. But it was not the view that captured her attention. It was the art. Every wall displayed paintings and sculptures that belonged in museums. She recognized a genuine Rothko, an early Basquiat, pieces worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. The man behind the fortune. "You came." The voice was deep and warm, carrying a note of genuine surprise. Victor Kane emerged from a side room, and Sienna found herself staring. He was not what she expected from a billionaire real estate developer. Yes, he wore expensive clothes, a black cashmere sweater and tailored pants, but there was something unpolished about him. His dark hair was slightly too long, touching his collar. His eyes held shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried alone. "You're painting at the coffee shop," he continued, moving closer. The woman standing in the rain, looking up at the light. "I stood there for 20 minutes just feeling it." "When was the last time art made you feel something real?" Sienna swallowed hard. "I painted that after my mother's diagnosis. Cancer. I was trying to capture what hope looks like when everything feels dark." Something flickered across his face. Understanding. Recognition. "My father died of cancer when I was 17. We could not afford treatment. I built all of this," he gestured at the opulent space around them, "because I never wanted to feel that helpless again." The honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. This was not the cold businessman she had imagined. This was someone who understood loss, who knew what it meant to fight for survival. The challenge revealed. "I have a proposal." Victor led her through the apartment to a private gallery space she had not noticed before. "I collect art, but I also support artists I believe in. I want to commission you for something special." He opened a door, and Sienna gasped. The room beyond was a working studio, complete with professional lighting, every supply an artist could dream of, and dominating the space was the largest canvas she had ever seen. It stood 12 feet tall and 8 feet wide, stretched on a custom frame, the surface pristine and waiting. "This canvas is over 100 years old," Victor explained. "It came from a French estate. The fabric is Belgian linen, prepared with traditional rabbitskin glue. Artists today do not work on canvases like this anymore. Too expensive, too difficult. But I thought someone with your talent deserved the chance to create something truly extraordinary." Sienna approached the canvas like it was sacred ground. The surface had a luminous quality, a depth that modern materials could never replicate. She could already see possibilities forming in her mind, layers of color and meaning waiting to emerge. But doubt crept in quickly. "Mr. Kane, I appreciate this, but I work in a tiny apartment. My largest painting is maybe 3 feet square. Something this size requires techniques I have only read about. The weight of the materials alone, the amount of paint needed, the physical strength to work at this scale. The moment of truth. It is too big for me, she whispered nervously, hating how small her voice sounded. All her life, people had told her to dream smaller, to be realistic, to accept her limitations. Standing before this canvas felt like standing before every impossible dream she had ever buried. Victor moved beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His presence was solid, grounding. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Just use your hands. She turned to look at him, confused. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, erasing years of stress and revealing something boyish and hopeful underneath. You think this is about physical strength, but it is not. Your hands know how to create beauty. Your heart knows how to translate pain into something meaningful. I am not asking you to do this alone. I will provide everything you need. Assistance to help with the heavy work. Premium materials. Time. Space. All you need to do is trust your hands to guide the creation. He reached out and gently took her paint-stained fingers in his. His hands were warm, larger than hers, but he held hers carefully, respectfully. These hands stopped me in my tracks at a coffee shop. These hands made me feel something I thought I had forgotten how to feel. Do not tell me they are not enough. Sienna felt tears prick her eyes. In that moment, she realized this was about more than art. This was about believing she deserved the chance to create something extraordinary. That her dreams were not too big, but that perhaps her belief in herself had been too small. When can I start? She heard herself say. Tomorrow, Victor replied, still holding her hands. But tonight, let me show you the rest of my collection. Let me tell you about the artists I have supported, the ones who thought their dreams were impossible until someone believed in them. As he led her back into the main gallery, Sienna felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she had been carrying, the burden of struggling alone, of thinking she had to prove herself without help, began to lighten. Maybe strength was not about doing everything alone. Maybe it was about having the courage to accept support when it was offered with genuine respect and belief. Neither of them noticed Christine Walsh standing in the shadows of the hallway, her expression cold as she watched Victor look at this unknown artist with an attention he had never given anyone else. Christine had worked beside Victor for 6 years, had made herself essential to his empire, and had been waiting for him to see her as more than just his business manager. But the way he looked at Sienna Cole told Christine everything she needed to know. This was not just professional interest. This was the beginning of something that threatened to unravel all the careful plans Christine had been weaving. And she would not allow some struggling artist to take what should be hers. The canvas waited in the studio, vast and empty, ready to hold whatever story would unfold upon its surface. But the real masterpiece was just beginning, written not in paint but in the connection between two people who had forgotten how to hope until they found each other, the first morning. Sienna arrived at Meridian Tower before sunrise, unable to sleep from the excitement coursing through her veins. The security guard recognized her immediately and waved her through with a knowing smile. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, she found Victor already awake, standing by the windows with a cup of coffee, watching the city emerge from darkness. I thought I would be the first one here, Sienna said, setting down her bag of personal brushes and sketchbooks. Victor turned, and she noticed the circles under his eyes, the rumpled state of his sweater suggesting he had never gone to bed. I do not sleep much anymore. Have not for years. Too many thoughts, too many responsibilities. He gestured toward the kitchen. Coffee is fresh. Help yourself to anything you need. This is your space now as much as mine. As Sienna poured coffee into a simple ceramic mug, so different from the expensive art surrounding them, she felt the strangeness of the situation settle over her. Here she was, in a billionaire's private apartment, about to create something that might define her entire career. The weight of it should have been crushing, but instead, she felt an odd sense of rightness. Understanding the vision. They stood together before the enormous canvas, and Victor asked the question that would shape everything to come. What do you see when you look at this empty space? Sienna was quiet for a long moment, letting her artist's eye take in the dimensions, the way morning light would hit the surface, the energy of the room itself. I see two figures, she said slowly. Not touching, but reaching toward each other across distance. One figure is made of shadow and weight, bending under invisible burdens. The other is made of light and color, offering something precious. The space between them is the most important part because that is where transformation happens. Where heaviness meets hope. Victor's breath caught audibly. That is exactly what I need but could never articulate. Why this painting? Sienna asked, turning to face him. You collect finished masterpieces. Why commission something new? Why take the risk that I might fail? He met her eyes, and the vulnerability there made her chest tighten. Because finished masterpieces are safe. They are already proven. But watching something come into existence, being part of that creation, that is where real beauty lives. I have spent 15 years building an empire, acquiring things that already have value. I want to be part of making something valuable from nothing. The work begins. Sienna spent the first 3 days just sketching, filling page after page with studies and ideas. Victor would check in periodically, but mostly he gave her space, understanding instinctively that creation required solitude. But each evening around 8, like clockwork, he would appear with dinner from whatever restaurant Christine had ordered from, and they would eat together while Sienna explained her process. The underpainting is crucial, she explained on the third night, gesturing at her sketches with a piece of spring roll. I will build the figures in layers, starting with a monochrome base to establish values and depth. Then color, but not the colors people expect. The figure in shadow will have warm undertones, golds and reds hidden beneath the darkness. The figure of light will have cool undertones, blues and greens. It creates visual tension that makes the eye work, makes people lean in closer. Victor listened with an intensity that made her self-conscious. No one had ever paid such careful attention to her thoughts before. You understand that art is not about what you see on the surface. It is about what lies beneath. That is true for people too, Sienna said softly. Everyone has layers. Hidden colors beneath what they show the world. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. A question neither was ready to ask aloud. The hidden observer. What neither of them knew was that Christine Walsh had been watching every interaction through the building's security system. As Victor's business manager, she had access to everything, including the private cameras installed for security purposes. She watched them laugh together over dinner. Watched Victor's face transform when Sienna explained her artistic vision. Watched the way they unconsciously leaned toward each other, drawn by a connection Christine had tried for 6 years to create with him. Christine sat in her immaculate office 3 floors below, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her glass desk. She had devoted herself to Victor's success, had sacrificed relationships and personal dreams to make herself indispensable to him. She knew his schedule better than he did, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and had carefully positioned herself as the one constant in his chaotic world. But Sienna Cole threatened all of that. This nobody artist with paint under her fingernails and thrift store clothes was doing what Christine had failed to do. She was making Victor feel something. Christine opened her laptop and began researching. Everyone had secrets, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. She would find Sienna's weakness, and she would use it to drive a wedge between them before this infatuation became something more dangerous. The breakthrough. On the 7th day, Sienna finally felt ready to touch brush to canvas. She had Victor hire 2 art students to help prepare the surface and mix the massive quantities of paint she would need. The studio transformed into organized chaos, with color charts and reference images covering every available surface. Victor found excuses to spend more time in the studio, claiming he was working on his laptop in the corner, but Sienna noticed how often he watched her instead of his screen. She should have found it distracting, but somehow his presence anchored her, gave her courage to make bold choices she might have second-guessed alone. "Tell me about your mother," Victor said one afternoon as Sienna worked on the underpainting, her arm aching from the physical effort of covering such a large surface. She paused, brush hovering in the air. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I see her in your work. The way you paint light, it is not happy or naive. It is light that has survived darkness. That only exists because of darkness." Sienna set down her brush and wiped her hands on her already paint-covered apron. She was a music teacher. Piano. She had students who adored her, and she had this way of finding the beauty in every person, even the ones everyone else had given up on. When she got sick, I watched her lose everything. Her strength, her ability to play, eventually her ability to speak. But she never lost her ability to see beauty. Even at the end, she would squeeze my hand when she heard music, and her face would light up like she was touching something sacred. Tears streamed down Sienna's face, and she did not bother wiping them away. She died 6 months ago. The bills are crushing me, but I cannot bring myself to be angry about it. She taught me that creating beauty is the most important thing we can do in a world full of pain. So I paint. Victor stood and crossed the room. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, and Sienna let herself collapse against his chest, sobbing with a grief she had been holding back for months. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to fix her pain. He just held her, steady and solid, letting her fall apart safely. "My father taught me to build things," Victor said quietly, his voice rumbling against her ear. "He was a carpenter before the factory job. He said that creating something with your hands was the only immortality working people could have. Our names would not be in history books, but the houses he built would shelter families long after he was gone. When he died, I promised myself I would build something so big that it could never be forgotten. But I forgot what he actually taught me. It is not about the size of what you build. It is about whether it shelters something precious." Sienna pulled back enough to look up at him, and the expression on his face stole her breath. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and made decisions worth millions looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. The shift. "I should get back to work," Sienna whispered, but neither of them moved. "You should," Victor agreed, but his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Then Sienna's phone buzzed loudly in her pocket, shattering the spell. She stepped back, fumbling for it, and saw a message from the hospital billing department. Another payment was overdue. The reality of her situation crashed back over her. She was here on borrowed time, in a borrowed world. Victor Kane was kind and generous, but he lived in a stratosphere she could never truly inhabit. What was she thinking, letting herself feel this connection? She had seen this story before. The rich man, the struggling artist, the inevitable heartbreak when he moved on to someone from his own world. "I need to return some calls," Victor said, his voice carefully controlled. He had seen her expression change, felt her withdraw. "I will leave you to work." After he left, Sienna stood alone in the studio, staring at the half-finished underpainting. The figure of shadow was beginning to emerge, and she realized with a jolt that she had unconsciously given it Victor's posture, the way he carried weight on his shoulders. She was painting them. Their story. The connection neither of them was brave enough to name. The poisoned seed. 3 floors below, Christine smiled as she typed an email to the building's board of directors. She had found exactly what she needed. Sienna's mother had died with over $200,000 in medical debt. Debt that Sienna was legally responsible for. Debt that a clever person might try to discharge through a convenient relationship with a wealthy benefactor. Christine crafted her message carefully, planting seeds of doubt without making direct accusations. She copied Victor on the email, knowing he checked his messages obsessively. All she needed was for him to question Sienna's motives. Once doubt entered, it would spread like poison through everything beautiful they were building. As she hit send, Christine felt no guilt. She was protecting Victor from being used. That was what she told herself. That was the story she chose to believe. Because the alternative, that she was destroying something genuine out of jealousy, was too ugly to acknowledge. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the studio, Sienna worked late into the night, pouring her confused feelings onto the canvas. And in his office, Victor stared at Christine's email, feeling doubt creep into his chest like ice water, freezing the hope that had just begun to bloom. The masterpiece was taking shape, but so was the conflict that would test whether what they were building was strong enough to survive the weight of suspicion and fear. The distance between morning light filtered through the studio windows, but the warmth Sienna had grown accustomed to was absent. Victor had not visited in 3 days. No evening dinners, no quiet conversations while she worked, just silence broken only by the sound of her brush against canvas and the distant hum of the city below. She told herself it was better this way. She had been foolish to think their connection meant anything beyond professional respect. He was a billionaire with responsibilities she could not fathom, and she was just an artist he had hired. The painting was nearly complete, and once it was finished, she would return to her real life. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, it felt like something vital was being torn away. The figures on the canvas had evolved beyond her initial vision. The shadow figure now reached with desperate intensity toward the light figure, but the light figure had turned slightly away, as if afraid of what accepting that touch might mean. The space between them had become a chasm filled with unspoken fears and impossible questions. It is beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Sienna spun around to find Victor standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his usual composure fractured. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shirt was wrinkled, as if he had been wearing it for days. "I thought you were avoiding me," Sienna said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was." Victor stepped into the studio but kept his distance, maintaining the same painful gap she had painted between her figures. "I received an email from my business manager. About your mother's medical debt. About the financial pressure you are under." Sienna's heart dropped into her stomach. "I see. Christine suggested that I should question your motives for accepting this commission. That perhaps your interest in this project, in me, might be influenced by your desperate financial situation." The words hung in the air like poison. Sienna felt anger and humiliation war inside her chest. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but the accusation was so ugly that she could barely form words around it. "Is that what you think?" Her voice came out small, wounded. "That I am here trying to manipulate you for money?" The truth emerges. Victor closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "No. That is the problem. Christine presented me with a logical argument, showed me facts and figures about your debt, pointed out how convenient this opportunity must seem to you. Everything she said made sense, except for one thing." He moved closer, finally crossing the distance he had been maintaining. "I know you, Sienna. I have watched you work. I have seen how you agonize over every brushstroke, how you pour your heart into this canvas without holding anything back. Someone trying to manipulate me would be calculating, careful. You are raw and honest and so genuine that it actually scares me." Sienna felt tears burning her eyes. "Why did you avoid me then? If you did not believe her?" "Because I was afraid she might be right about something else." Victor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She said I was confusing gratitude for something deeper. That you might feel obligated to return my feelings because I gave you this opportunity. That any relationship between us would be unequal, built on a foundation of debt and power imbalance." The confession hung between them, heavy with vulnerability. Sienna understood then that Victor had not been protecting himself from being used. He had been trying to protect her from feeling trapped by obligation. "You are an idiot," Sienna said, and despite the tears streaming down her face, she laughed. "A well-meaning, thoughtful idiot, but still an idiot." Victor blinked in surprise. "I do not understand." "Let me paint you a picture," Sienna said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the canvas. "Do you see these figures? I have been working on them for weeks, and every day they have changed because every day my understanding changes. At first, I thought the shadow figure was reaching for the light because it needed saving. But that is not what this is about at all." She pointed to the shadow figure, to the hidden warm colors glowing beneath the darkness. "This figure is not weak. It is burdened, yes, but look at the strength in these lines. The way it stands despite the weight. This is someone who has survived, who has built something meaningful from pain. The reaching is not about desperation. It is about courage. The courage to be vulnerable when vulnerability feels dangerous." Then she gestured to the light figure. "And this one is not turning away because it does not care. Look at the body language, the tension in these lines. It is terrified. It has been hurt before, has learned that accepting help means owing something you cannot repay. So it holds its light close, afraid that offering it freely means losing part of itself." The revelation. Victor stared at the painting with new eyes, and Sienna watched understanding dawn across his face. The space between them is fear. Not lack of connection, but too much connection. They are both afraid of what happens if they bridge that gap. "Yes." Sienna turned to face him fully. "I do not feel obligated to you, Victor. I feel terrified of you. Terrified because you see me in a way no one else ever has. Terrified because accepting your support feels like admitting I cannot do everything alone, and I have built my entire identity around being strong enough to survive without help. Terrified because when you look at me, I feel like I matter in a way that has nothing to do with what I can offer and everything to do with who I am." Her voice broke on the last word, and Victor reached up to cup her face in his hands, the same gesture he had made days before. But this time, neither of them pulled away. "I am terrified too," he admitted. "I have spent 15 years building walls, proving I do not need anyone. My marriage failed because I kept everyone at arm's length, afraid that letting someone see my vulnerabilities would give them power over me. But you walked into my life and saw through everything I hide behind. You looked at my expensive art collection and understood that I was trying to buy meaning because I had forgotten how to create it. What do we do?" Sienna whispered. "We be brave enough to finish what we started." Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone, and the tenderness in the gesture made her breath catch. "Not just the painting. Us." When he kissed her, it felt like the final piece of the masterpiece falling into place. Not desperate or rushed, but certain. A declaration that fear would not win, that vulnerability was strength, that reaching across the distance between two wounded people was the bravest form of creation. The confrontation. The studio door slammed open, and Christine Walsh stood there, her professional composure shattered. Her hair was disheveled, her usually perfect makeup smudged, and her eyes held a wildness that sent alarm racing through Sienna's veins. "This is touching," Christine said, her voice dripping with venom. "But before you ride off into your fairy tale ending, there are some things you should know about each other." "Christine, that is enough." Victor stepped in front of Sienna protectively. "Your email was inappropriate and out of line. I think it is time we discussed your future with the company." "My future?" Christine laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the studio walls. "I have given you 6 years of my life, Victor. 6 years of organizing your world, protecting you from people who would take advantage of your wealth, making myself essential to everything you have built. And you are going to throw that away for some girl you met 3 weeks ago?" "I am not throwing anything away," Victor said firmly. "But I am also not going to let you sabotage something meaningful because you have convinced yourself that loyalty equals ownership." Christine's face twisted with rage and pain. I know things about both of you. Sienna, did you tell him that you called your mother's hospital before she died and begged them to stop treatment because you could not afford it? That you essentially chose to let her die rather than drown in debt? Sienna felt the words hit like physical blows. The guilt she had carried for months, the decision that haunted her dreams, exposed in the cruelest possible way. And Victor, Christine continued, turning her venom on him, did you tell her that your wife left because she found out you cannot have children? That the real reason you bury yourself in work is because you are terrified of building any relationship that might end in the same failure? The silence that followed was devastating. Two secrets, two wounds, laid bare like weapons. The choice. Victor looked at Sienna, and she saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. They could walk away now, retreat behind their walls where secrets stayed buried and vulnerability could not hurt them. It would be easier, safer. They had only known each other for 3 weeks. This could end before it truly began, and they could both go back to their separate lives of controlled isolation. Or they could choose something harder. I did ask them to stop treatment, Sienna said, her voice steady despite the tears. Not because I did not love my mother, but because she was suffering. The doctors said she had days left regardless, and those days would be agony. She could not speak, but when I held her hand and asked if she wanted peace, she squeezed twice. Our signal for yes. So I made the hardest choice of my life, not to save money, but to grant her the dignity she asked for. She turned to Victor. I carry guilt for that choice every day. I wonder if I gave up too soon, if I should have fought harder. But I also know I honored her wishes. That is the truth Christine wanted to weaponize. The truth is more complicated than shame. Victor took her hand, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I cannot have children because of complications from a childhood illness. When Vanessa found out, she said I was broken, defective. That she had not signed up to be married to half a man. She left me feeling like my worth was defined by what I could not provide. He looked at Christine, and there was no anger in his expression, only sadness. You thought exposing our vulnerabilities would drive us apart. But you do not understand that real connection is not built on perfection. It is built on seeing someone's scars and choosing to love them anyway. The final brushstroke. Christine stared at them for a long moment, and something crumbled behind her eyes. The rage drained away, leaving only exhaustion and regret. I convinced myself I was protecting you, she said quietly. But I was just afraid of being alone. Of realizing I had spent 6 years in love with someone who would never see me that way. You deserve better than that, Victor said gently. You deserve someone who chooses you first, not someone you have to compete for. I am sorry if I ever gave you hope where there was none. Christine nodded slowly, then turned and walked out of the studio. The sound of her heels clicking down the hallway faded, and Sienna knew they would not see her again. Sienna turned back to the canvas, studying the figures with fresh eyes. I need to change the painting. What do you mean? She picked up her brush and began working on the space between the figures. They should not be separated by fear. They should be connected by courage. For hours, Sienna worked while Victor watched. She painted over the chasm between the figures, replacing empty space with a bridge made of intertwining colors, warm and cool tones blending together. The shadow figure's reaching hand now touched the light figure's outstretched palm, and in that touch, both figures transformed. The shadow figure began to glow with hidden light. The light figure gained substance and strength from the shadow's depth. They were no longer two separate beings reaching across distance. They were two parts of a whole, each making the other more complete. The unveiling. 3 months later, the painting was unveiled in the lobby of Meridian Tower. Hundreds of people gathered for the event, critics and collectors and curious onlookers drawn by the buzz surrounding Victor Kane's mysterious commission. Sienna stood beside Victor, her hand tucked into his, as the curtain dropped away. The crowd gasped. The painting towered above them, 12 feet of raw emotion and technical mastery. But it was the title that made people lean in closer, made them see beyond the technical skill to the story underneath. The Weight of Dreams, Two Figures Choosing Courage. A critic from the Times approached them, notebook in hand. "Ms. Cole, there is something deeply personal about this work. The way these figures connect, it feels autobiographical." Sienna smiled. "All real art is autobiographical. We paint what we know, what we feel, what we survive. This painting is about learning that strength is not about carrying weight alone. It is about being brave enough to reach for help and wise enough to offer support without demanding anything in return. And you, Mr. Kane," the critic turned to Victor. "You have collected art for years but never commissioned an original work. Why now? Why this?" Victor looked at Sienna, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch even after months together. "Because I spent my life acquiring finished masterpieces, safe investments that were already proven valuable. But the most meaningful thing I have ever been part of creating is not on that wall. It is standing beside me." The crowd murmured with appreciation, but Sienna barely heard them. She was looking at the painting, at the story they had created together. The shadow and the light, the burden and the hope, the fear and the courage to love anyway. Her mother had taught her that creating beauty was the most important thing we could do in a world full of pain. But Sienna had learned something more. The greatest masterpiece was not painted on canvas. It was built in the space between two people brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be gentle, and wise enough to know that real love was not about being saved. It was about choosing each other, scars and all, and creating something beautiful from shared imperfection. Epilogue, 6 months later. The studio in Meridian Tower had become Sienna's permanent workspace. Victor had insisted, and she had stopped fighting him on gestures of support. She was working on a new series, smaller pieces exploring themes of transformation and connection. Her mother's medical debt had been paid, not by Victor's money, but by the sale of the massive painting to a museum for a price that made Sienna's head spin. She had enough now to live comfortably, to create without the constant pressure of survival. But more than financial security, she had found something she had never expected. A partnership. Someone who challenged her artistically, who understood her silences, who held her when grief still struck without warning, and who let her hold him when his own darkness crept in. They were not perfect. They fought sometimes about work-life balance, about Sienna's tendency to lose herself in projects for days, about Victor's instinct to solve problems with money when Sienna needed emotional support. But they learned. They grew. They chose each other again and again, which was what love actually was. Not a single dramatic moment, but 1,000 small choices to stay, to listen, to try. On a Tuesday evening, as Sienna worked on a new canvas and Victor sat in his corner with his laptop, neither speaking but comfortable in shared silence, she realized this was what happiness looked like. Not dramatic or Instagram-worthy, just peaceful. Just right. "I love you," she said without looking up from her work. "I know," Victor replied, smiling at his screen. "You painted on every canvas." And she did. In every brushstroke, every color choice, every figure reaching bravely across the distance between isolation and connection. Because that was the secret her mother had known all along. Art was not separate from life. It was life, captured in a moment of courage when someone chose to create beauty despite the weight of the world pressing down on their shoulders. The masterpiece had never been the painting on the wall. It had always been this. Two wounded people finding each other in the darkness and discovering that together, they could create their own light. The end.